Have you ever felt powerless? When the world around you crushes your voice, and all you have left is dignity? In the colonies, dignity was a dangerous thing. The king's officers called it defiance. The wealthy merchants called it rebellion. But for the poor farmers, widows, and children of the frontier, it was simply the right to live free. They worked the land, bled for it, and prayed for a tomorrow that seemed to never come. The English lords rode past in carriages of gold, while patriots starved under the weight of their taxes and the boots of their soldiers. Humiliation became routine. Betrayal became law. Yet from that darkness, something sacred began to burn, the spirit of freedom itself. It whispered through the fields, across the rivers, through every heart that refused to kneel. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to hear may shock you. A story not of victory, but of sacrifice. Of a farmer who met a child in the cold and discovered that courage sometimes comes wearing scars. Welcome, my fellow patriots. From which city are you watching today? Check if you're already subscribed. Give this video a like. And now, let's begin our story. The flames cracked in the silence, reflecting in the men's eyes like ghosts of lost hope. Mary's trembling voice cut through the smoke as she spoke, of the manor, of cold stone walls, and the sound of chains scraping against the floor, of a place where laughter was forbidden and mercy had no name. Every word she spoke was another wound torn open. The men clenched their fists, their faces carved with the weariness of too many years of obedience. Samuel Brewer said nothing at first. He only stared into the fire, seeing the faces of his own children now buried beneath the weight of hunger and war. Then he rose slowly, and when he spoke, the night itself seemed to listen. Tomorrow, he said, his tone hard as iron, no child will cry beneath his whip again. I swear it before God and liberty. No one dared breathe. Around them, the dark forest echoed with the distant cries of owls, or perhaps of souls not yet free. One by one, the men nodded. They were farmers, blacksmiths, widowers, and dreamers, not soldiers. Yet in that moment they became something else. Patriots bound not by uniform, but by pain and by an oath. The air itself seemed to change, thick with a sense of awakening. The rebellion, once a whisper in the taverns, had found its heart among the broken and the forgotten. The English called them savages, rebels, traitors to the crown. But these men knew the truth. They had been betrayed first, betrayed by the lords who feasted while their children starved, betrayed by the laws that called them subjects instead of men. Every insult, every lash, every humiliation had built toward this night. Mary slept near the fire, her small hands clutching Brewer's worn coat. Her scars glowed faintly under the moonlight, reminders of all they had lost and all they still might lose. Brewer watched her, his heart heavy with both rage and tenderness. Freedom, he thought, was not born from speeches or parchment. It was born from moments like this, when a man decided he could no longer bow. At dawn, mist rolled over the fields. The men prepared their rifles, old, rusted, half-broken tools of defiance. Brewer tied a red cloth around his arm, a symbol of sacrifice. They would not march under any king's banner. Their flag was their suffering, their anthem the cries of the oppressed. As they moved toward Whitmore Manor, the rising sun bled across the horizon like a wound reopening. In the distance, the estate stood tall, arrogant, its white columns gleaming with stolen wealth. Somewhere inside, Lord Whitmore drank his morning tea, unaware that the tide was turning, that the humiliated were gathering strength, that his empire of degradation was about to face men who no longer feared death. Each step felt like a prayer, each heartbeat a declaration of dignity. Brewer's mind raced with visions of what lay ahead: blood, loss, perhaps even ruin. But beyond that lay something greater: transformation, the birth of a new kind of man, no longer a servant but a citizen of his own destiny. He knew this night would demand sacrifice. Freedom always did. And as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of smoke and gunpowder yet to come, he tightened his grip on the rifle and whispered to himself, not as a warrior, but as a father, as a patriot, let them call us rebels. Let them call us mad. We only seek what God himself gave us, the right to stand as men. Behind him, the men followed in silence. Ahead, the manor waited, and with it, the reckoning that would change them all forever. Comment: I stand with the Patriots. Elias Carter kept his eyes lowered as he carried buckets through the courtyard of Whitmore Manor. The frost bit at his hands, but he didn't flinch. Every gesture had to be perfect. The slouched shoulders, the silent obedience, the humble gait of a man broken by servitude. Yet beneath that mask burned the same fire that had carried him through battles in the woods, where patriots whispered of liberty under cover of darkness. Now, he walked among the enemy, the architects of degradation, the masters of shame. The manor was a monument to vanity. Golden frames, velvet drapes, silver platters filled with untouched bread. Every piece of wealth seemed to scream of betrayal, of what had been taken from the fields, the rivers, the lives of the forgotten. Elias saw servants move like ghosts, their eyes hollow, their backs scarred. Some were too young to understand the weight of their chains. Others had already accepted them. And above it all, Lord Whitmore stood like a king among peasants, his red coat gleaming as though it were stitched from the blood of patriots. Whitmore's words still echoed through the halls. Pain is the only language rebels understand. The phrase haunted Elias as he scrubbed the stables, the smell of iron and damp hay mixing with the memories of war. He had seen men tortured for less, for whispering a prayer of independence, for hiding a musket, for daring to dream of dignity. But this was different. This was not punishment. It was pleasure. Whitmore enjoyed the suffering he created. It gave him power. It fed his pride. Elias worked his way through the corridors, memorizing guard positions, counting rifles stacked near the servants' quarters. He heard whispers of a locked cellar, a place where the defiant were sent for correction. That night, as snow began to fall, he slipped into the shadows and followed the sound of muffled cries. The air grew colder, the walls damper. When he reached the cellar door, the stench of blood and rot made him tremble. Inside, he found the truth. Children chained to the wall, their backs marked with lashes. A young boy prayed softly, asking God not for rescue, but for strength. In that moment, Elias understood the full measure of their disgrace. This was not merely oppression. It was the deliberate erasure of hope. The king's men were not enforcing order. They were feeding on despair. He knelt beside the boy and whispered, "It won't be long, son. The day is coming." The boy opened his eyes and, despite his pain, smiled faintly. "Are you one of them?" he asked. Elias hesitated. "No," he said finally. "I'm one of us." As he rose, footsteps echoed above, Whitmore's voice barking orders, followed by laughter. Elias slipped into the shadows once more, his heart pounding with both fury and revelation. He now understood why Brewer had sworn that oath beneath the stars. This was not just a fight for land or coin, it was a battle for the soul of a people. Every scar, every insult, every humiliation had been preparing them for this reckoning. He reached the courtyard again, the cold moon shining down on the Union Jack waving proudly above the manor. To the English, it symbolized civilization. To him, it was a banner of degradation. He wanted to tear it down, to burn it until only ashes remained. But he couldn't. Not yet. He still needed proof, and he knew that. One wrong move could doom them all. As dawn approached, Elias returned to the stables, his hands trembling not from fear, but from rage. He had seen the hidden truth, the face of evil that the crown tried to dress in silk and ceremony. He had entered as a servant, but he would leave as a messenger, a witness to the crimes that demanded vengeance. And as the first light of morning touched the horizon, he whispered to himself, "They think we are slaves. They think we have no power, but liberty is patient, and she never forgets." The courtyard was silent except for the sound of leather striking flesh. The whip cracked through the cold morning air, echoing like thunder across the stone walls. Elias stood among the servants, his back bent, his face turned away, but every lash tore at his soul. Thomas Reed, a frail boy barely 10, was tied to the post. His cries faded after the first few strikes, replaced by the dull rhythm of pain and the overseer's cruel laughter. 50, the man said, his voice thick with pride, 50 for defiance. Let that teach them what liberty costs. The crowd of servants didn't move. Fear had turned them into statues. Only Elias trembled, not from terror, but from fury barely contained. He bit his tongue until he tasted blood. Dignity was a dangerous thing to feel in a place like this. When the boy finally collapsed, the overseer tossed the whip aside and wiped his hands as if he'd finished a chore. Bury him if he dies, he said carelessly, or send him back to the fields if he lives. Either way, the lesson's done. Laughter followed him into the manor's grand hall. Elias knelt beside the child, feeling the faint breath that still lingered. He wrapped his coat around him, whispering words of comfort he didn't truly believe. The sight of those wounds, deep, deliberate, carved into a child's back, burned into his mind. That image would never leave him. It was no longer a mission. It was a calling. That night, as snow covered the grounds, Elias sat in the stables under the faint light of a lantern. He tore a small piece of parchment, dipped a feather into soot and water, and wrote the words carefully. The whip counts 50. The devil lives. It was all Brewer needed to know. The message was hidden inside a loaf of bread, bound for the village with the morning deliveries. Every word was a blade, every mark a promise of reckoning. He could hear the English soldiers drinking in the upper halls, boasting of their conquests. The rebels have no stomach for war, one said. They'll crawl back to their farms once the king's men march through. Another laughed, pouring more wine. They speak of independence, yet they can't even defend their own women. Elias listened, his jaw tightening. He had fought beside those same farmers. He had seen their courage in the woods, their hunger, their silence, when the world spat in their faces. He knew their worth, men who carried liberty not in words, but in their scars. As the hours passed, Elias wandered the corridors once more, driven by something deeper than duty. In the manor's library, he found Whitmore seated near the fire, dictating to his steward. The governor demands we make examples, Whitmore said. Increase the quotas. Any whisper of rebellion must be drowned in pain. The colonists understand only the language of the lash. The steward nodded obediently, writing down every word. Elias felt the room spin. This was no mere cruelty. It was policy, a deliberate system of degradation crafted by men who called themselves civilized. He turned to leave, but Whitmore's hound stirred. Its growl broke the silence. Whitmore looked up, his eyes narrowing. You there, stable boy? What are you doing inside? Elias bowed low, his heart pounding. Forgive me, my lord. The kitchens ran out of firewood. Whitmore waved his hand dismissively. Then fetch some and leave. And tell the cook to keep that bread warm. Tomorrow we dine with the crown's officers. There will be toasts to loyalty, loyalty. The word tasted like poison. Elias walked away slowly, forcing his steps to remain steady. When he reached the cold night air, he allowed himself to breathe again. Above him, the stars were fading, but the fire within him grew brighter. Somewhere beyond those hills, Brewer and his men were waiting, men of soil and sweat, preparing to face an empire built on arrogance. Elias knew the time for secrecy was ending. Every decision now would carry a price. Every mistake could mean death, but there was no turning back. He looked toward the horizon, where the faint glow of dawn touched the snow. They think they own us, he whispered. They think our silence means surrender, but the ground beneath them is waking. The wind carried his words into the darkness, like a warning yet to be heard. The tavern smelled of smoke, ale, and despair. The walls, darkened by years of silence and secrets, seemed to breathe with the weight of what was about to unfold. Brewer sat at the center table, the note in his hand trembling under the faint candlelight. The whip counts 50. The devil lives. The words cut deeper than any blade. Around him, faces hardened by loss and humiliation watched in silence, men and women who had already given everything but still had more to lose. Jacob Price's eyes glowed like embers, his arms scarred from the forge that once fed his family before the king's collectors took it all. Martha Hall stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly around a rosary blackened with soot. Her husband's grave lay on the edge of her seized land, unmarked, forgotten by all but her. Brewer lifted his gaze. It's not vengeance we seek, he said, voice low and rough. It's justice, the kind the crown denies us, the kind we must take with our own hands. His words filled the air like smoke, thick, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Jacob stepped forward. Justice? His voice cracked. My boy was 12 when they took him to pay a debt I never owed. He died building Whitmore's walls. I've buried my faith, my pride, my name. Justice died with him. Brewer met his eyes. Then let it be reborn through us. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the scent of snow and smoke from distant farms. Farms burned for failing to meet tax quotas. The tavern door creaked open, and Elias Carter entered, his coat torn, his face pale with exhaustion. He tossed a small sack onto the table. It landed with a dull thud. When Brewer opened it, a small silver seal gleamed inside, the mark of Lord Whitmore. "He's planning a feast," Elias said quietly. "Tomorrow night. Officers, merchants, loyalists, all gathered to toast their triumphs while our people starve. And beneath the manor, the children still cry." Silence fell again. Martha's trembling hand reached for the seal. "And we?" she asked. "What do we do while they celebrate their cruelty?" Elias's voice was steady, but his eyes burned with fury. "We end the celebration. For a moment no one spoke. The fire hissed softly, a single flame fighting against the draft. Then Brewer leaned forward, his tone calm yet filled with that sacred edge of conviction only men on the brink of sacrifice possess. "Tomorrow night they will taste what they have made us swallow for years: shame, pain, and loss. We do this not for revenge, but so our children may live free of their chains. Every decision we make tonight will shape what remains of our world." Jacob nodded, his jaw set. "Then let it be done. For every lash, for every tear." Brewer looked at the group. Farmers, widows, a wounded scout, a blacksmith stripped of his son. Ordinary souls bound by one truth. They had been humiliated beyond redemption, but not beyond transformation. "We strike at dawn's shadow," he said. "No glory, no songs, only purpose." They began to plan in whispers, drawing maps into the dust-covered table. Brewer spoke of the secret tunnels Elias had seen beneath the stables, of the guards, patterns of the feast hall's heavy doors that would lock from the outside. Each word felt like a step deeper into destiny. There was no illusion of victory, only the certainty that dignity demanded sacrifice. When the candle burned low, Brewer rose and walked to the window. Snowflakes drifted down through the night, silent as prayers. He thought of Mary Larkin, the girl with the scars, sleeping somewhere beyond those hills. He thought of Thomas Reed, the boy who had counted 50 lashes before. The world went dark. And he thought of Whitmore, toasting the king with stolen wine. The flames in his heart burned cold and clear. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "they will learn what rebellion truly means." Behind him, the Patriots extinguished the candle, one by one, leaving only the glow of the hearth, fragile yet unyielding, like the spirit of liberty itself. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of a coming storm. "Right. The flame of freedom lives in me." Elias traced the inked lines on the torn map until the paper blurred. Each mark was a life, each cross a promise. He had counted the guards until sleep left him. He had watched their rotations, their drunken slouches, the way one always turned his head at the same song from the kitchen. Fear lived in his bones. Resolve lived there too. He folded the map into his coat and felt the weight of every decision pressing down like winter snow. They would move as shadows. 3 fires, 3 strikes. First, the children. The cellar would be opened before the manor knew it was missing air. No celebration would drown their cries this night. Second, the stables and the powder. If the armory fell, so would the arrogance of the redcoats. Third, Whitmore himself taken alive, dragged from his warm chair to face the faces he had broken. He would answer for every lash. He would watch what contempt had created. The tavern had become a war room. Jacob's hands trembled as he sharpened a bar to pry open locks. Martha had gathered blankets, soap, small comforts, things soldiers never think to deny. Brewer sat at the head, his jaw like stone. His voice was low, each syllable cut. "We do not seek blood for blood," he said. "We seek to end the shame. We will make them witness their own corruption." The words hung between them like smoke. Outside, the countryside slept under a brittle sky. Lanterns burned in the manor like beacons of arrogance. Inside those gilded rooms, merchants and officers toasted loyalty with stolen grain. They laughed at the poor as if poverty were a spectacle. They measured men by coin. They measured children by usefulness. This was the hidden truth Elias had seen in the cellar. Cruelty disguised as order. Policy disguised as justice. A system that fed on shame. Every step forward carried risk. Every plan required sacrifice. Jacob's face showed it. His loss carved new lines into him. Martha's eyes shone with a dignity that needed no words. Even the elders who could not march lent their prayers and memory. The militia were not soldiers by birth. They were farmers, mothers, blacksmiths, ordinary people turned into instruments of independence. Their transformation was quiet. It began in rage and ended in a strange, steady courage. Elias thought of Thomas Reed and Mary Larkin. He thought of the boy counting lashes and the girl hiding scars beneath her sleeves. Those images were fuel. They were proof that the insult of the crown was not abstract. It was flesh and bone. It demanded a reply. He laid the map on the table once more and tapped the 3 points where flames would start. Timing, he whispered. Precision. Mercy, where it can be given. Justice, where it must. Brewer nodded. The decision rested on small things. A stolen key, a wink from a weary servant, the silence of a windmill at the right hour. Revelations could come from the least likely places. A frightened cook might hold the line between disaster and salvation. A child's cry could be the signal that saved them all. They moved into position at the edge of dawn. Breath came visible in the cold. Musket barrels glinted like the teeth of some inevitable machine. The journey they had chosen was not a straight road. It twisted with doubt and demanded resolve at every turn. Betrayal had taught them to mistrust. That mistrust made them careful. It also made the coming strike sharper. The manor's shadow grew long as the first birds stirred. Within its walls, Whitmore slept, warm and secure. He had never known hunger. He had never measured a man by honor. He had never heard the whisper that liberty carries when it walks among the broken. Elias tightened his grip. He tasted iron and salt. He felt the weight of those who could not fight. He felt the weight of the choice to become more than a spy. The night had turned them into patriots not by title, but by sacrifice. Their march toward the manor was not for glory. It was a desperate, holy act of reclamation. The path ahead promised revelation and danger. It promised the moment when humiliation would be confronted by dignity. They stepped out together, a small flame moving toward a great darkness. The fog swallowed their shapes as they moved, silent as ghosts. The moon was a thin blade above them, pale and cold, cutting through the mist but revealing nothing. Martha led the women through the servants' path behind the orchard, where the air smelled of frost and fear. Her arms trembled as she carried a child who had forgotten how to cry. Behind her, others followed, widows, daughters, the remnants of the forgotten, each holding a bundle that breathed softly, each carrying the future wrapped in wool and desperation. No words were spoken. The night demanded silence. At the front, Brewer crouched by the iron gates, his hands slick with dew and determination. The old hinges groaned once, like a dying animal, before surrendering. He motioned forward, and his men slipped through. They were farmers in torn coats, not soldiers, but their steps were steady, and their hearts beat in rhythm with a cause that had long stopped belonging only to them. They were no longer fighting for revenge. This was survival. This was redemption. Elias crept along the outer wall, counting shadows. The guards were few, their vigilance dulled by wine and arrogance. He moved like a whisper, his knife flashing briefly as one torchlight dimmed, then vanished. He had killed before in war, in necessity, but tonight the act felt heavier. It was not bloodlust. It was duty, the kind that strips a man of sleep but not of honor. Inside the manor, laughter still echoed faintly from the great hall. The officers toasted to the king, their voices thick with pride and contempt. One boasted of the rebels he had hanged in New York. Another mocked the poor fools who still believed liberty could grow in soil soaked with their own tears. Whitmore raised his glass higher than the rest, declaring, "The rebellion dies tonight, not with gunfire, but with obedience." His words crawled through the corridors like a curse. Martha reached the cellar door, its lock already broken by Elias's hand. The stench hit her first, damp, iron, and misery. She held the lantern close, and what she saw froze her breath. Dozens of children, their faces pale, their wrists raw from chains. Some stared in disbelief. Others hid their eyes, fearing another trick. "You're free," Martha whispered. The words sounded foreign, fragile, almost sinful. The smallest boy clutched her skirt, voice trembling. "Is it real?" She knelt, pressing a trembling hand to his cheek. "It is now." One by one, the children were lifted, wrapped, and carried through the dark corridor. Brewer met them at the steps, his expression carved from stone. "Move quickly," he murmured. "We have little time." From the distance came the faint crack of wood. a door slamming, boots on marble. The alarm had not yet sounded, but time was thinning like breath in cold air. Jacob Price and 2 men reached the stables. The powder barrels stood lined like silent sentinels. He ran his hand along one, whispering a prayer. May this end what pain began. He struck the oil lamp and set it gently beside them, its flame weak but waiting. The plan was simple. If capture came, the fire would speak for them. Better ashes than chains. Elias returned from the courtyard, his coat streaked with blood. They're waking, he said. We've minutes, no more. Brewer nodded. His voice remained calm, though his eyes carried the weight of sacrifice. Then minutes must be enough. They moved again, a tide of courage flowing through the fog. The children were nearly clear of the gate when a trumpet shattered the silence. A shout rose from the walls. The English had seen the impossible, peasants defying power itself. Muskets flared, cutting the mist with fire. Brewer turned, shielding the last child with his body, shouting for the rest to run. Elias grabbed him, but Brewer pushed him away. Go! Protect what we've saved. The night erupted into chaos. Smoke, cries, the scent of powder thick in the air. The manor's lanterns blazed like an open wound. The journey to liberty had turned to battle, and the price of dignity would soon be written in blood. The manor woke to a different sound than wine and laughter. Timber splintered. Gates fell like verdicts. Men in ragged coats, faces hollowed by hunger and resolve, filled the courtyard. They moved with the terrible calm of those who had nothing left to lose. Lanterns rocked in the wind. Soldiers scrambled, boots clanging on stone. Whitmore, roused from sleep, stood at a tall window, his chest tight with indignation. He had always believed fear would keep men obedient. He had misread them. Brewer stepped forward, the morning light carving his silhouette into something the manor had never seen, a judge draped in the common cloth of the colonists. His voice carried over the yard, heavy and final. Lord Whitmore, come forth. Tonight you face the same justice you gave to the innocent. The words landed like a hammer. The crowd hissed. The servants, drawn from cellars and kitchens, watched with mouths shut. Some could not meet his eyes. Others wept without shame. Whitmore descended the steps with a noble's gait, red coat immaculate, arrogance still clinging to his shoulders. He expected snares. He expected pleading. He expected obedience. He did not expect witness. They brought the whip from the training post. It lay, coiled, stained with old cruelty. The sight of it made the men still. The instrument of degradation that had been used to break children now lay exposed to daylight. Whitmore's face shifted. Color drained. For the first time his name felt small. Jacob Price stepped forward, his hands raw from the forge and from holding grief. He did not shout. He did not beg. He placed his palm on the whip and let the room feel the weight of his loss. You measured men by profit, he said, voice hoarse. You, measured, children by use. You called it justice. You called it order. We call it betrayal. The words cracked like ice. Whitmore laughed, a brittle sound. You have no standing, he sneered. You are thieves in the night. The contempt was familiar. It had once silenced a dozen men. Now, it only sharpened them. Martha Hale moved close, the widow who had watched her land taken as if it were a debt paid in humiliation. She held a scrap of cloth, a child's sleeve, and let it fall at Whitmore's feet. Her dignity was a quiet accusation. Brewer spoke then of choices. We did not come for cruelty's echo. We came for truth. He named the children taken for debt, the men flogged for murmurs, the policies that made suffering lawful. Each revelation was a small retribution. Each detail stripped the manor of its pretense. Soldiers shifted uneasily as names were called. Faces in the balcony colored with guilt. Whitmore's steward tried to bargain. Officers whispered threats. The merchants muttered about property, law, and consequence. But the mood had changed. A system that fed on shame found itself exposed. Transformation had begun not in cannon fire but in testimony. The Patriots, ordinary men and women, had become witnesses to a hidden truth. Power without conscience decays. A decision hung between them like smoke. Some wanted the lash to return to its maker. Some wanted him bound and hauled to face those he'd harmed. Brewer's eyes wandered to the children now safe in the wagons, to Mary's pale face framed by blankets, to Thomas's empty bed. Sacrifice had carved their plan. Dignity demanded resolve. Whitmore swallowed. His arrogance cracked into fear. He had lived by insults and orders. Now he tasted the contempt he had once dished out. Yet the final act was not written. A choice remained that would define them all: vengeance or judgment, ruin or testimony, fire or law born from the people's will. The manor held its breath. Beyond the walls, the country watched, unknowingly, as a quiet revolution took form in a courtyard of stone and blood. Each man there had a journey ahead, hard decisions, hidden revelations, the risk of ultimate loss. The struggle had not ended. It had become a crucible. The sky was gray and heavy, as if the heavens themselves were ashamed to look down. The courtyard stank of smoke, sweat, and fear. Lord Whitmore stood bound to the very post where his orders had broken children and stripped the dignity from those who called this land home. His fine coat hung in tatters, his powdered wig torn away, revealing the fragile flesh beneath the arrogance. For the first time, the master of pain stood where the condemned had once stood. And around him, the people he had humiliated, farmers, widows, servants, gathered in a silence more powerful than any army. Brewer stepped forward, the whip coiled in his hand. His face was pale, his eyes hollowed by what he was about to do. "This is not vengeance," he said. His voice trembled, but did not break. "This is remembrance." He raised the whip and brought it down once. The sound cracked like thunder through the yard. The first lash was for Mary Larkin, the girl who had forgotten how to smile. The second, for Thomas Reed, whose back bore the marks of empire. The third, for every nameless soul buried without a cross. Each strike echoed the weight of centuries, of insult, betrayal, and disgrace. Whitmore did not beg. Pride is a stubborn thing. It clings even when blood spills. He spat curses, calling them traitors, vermin, rabble, unworthy of a crown's mercy. But the words lost meaning. Every lash erased them, each one stripping away another layer of false nobility. The soldiers who had once served him watched without moving. Some lowered their eyes. Others clenched their fists, the truth of their master's cruelty finally too heavy to deny. Brewer's arm grew weak, but he did not stop. Each strike was a name, a prayer for those who could no longer speak. "Martha Hale," whispered as he worked, her voice trembling with both sorrow and awe. "He made them kneel," she said. "Now he kneels before his own sins." The people did not cheer. Their tears mixed with the dirt, with the blood, with the rain that began to fall like mercy denied. When the count reached 100, Brewer let the whip fall. The post was soaked red. Whitmore slumped forward, not broken by pain alone, but by revelation that the power he had wielded had built nothing but rot. His voice cracked. Faint, almost human. "What are you now?" he rasped. "Executioners?" Brewer's reply came quiet but certain. "Patriots. Builders of a nation you could never understand." The air felt changed, heavy with the weight of transformation. This was not rebellion anymore. It was birth. The birth of conscience, of unity, of a fragile but unstoppable dignity. The whip that had once enforced submission now symbolized reckoning. In its cruel rhythm lay a truth the empire had buried, that the will of the people cannot be whipped into silence forever. Elias stepped beside Brewer, his face streaked with soot and rain. "It's done," he said. But Brewer's gaze lingered on the fallen lord. "No," he murmured. "It begins." Around them the people stood motionless, their silence louder than any anthem. The manor loomed behind them, a monument to tyranny now hollowed by its own shame. The children, safe in the wagons beyond the gate, watched as the fog swallowed the old world whole. Somewhere in the distance, the first light of dawn pushed through the clouds, weak, uncertain, but real. Freedom was no longer a dream whispered in taverns. It had been written here, in blood, in choice, in the quiet strength of those who had nothing left to lose but their chains. The morning came slowly, as if the world itself hesitated to face what had been done. Smoke drifted above the manor's roof, curling like ghosts released from centuries of silence. The air was heavy with the scent of gunpowder, damp, earth, and something new, the strange purity of justice long delayed. Brewer stood in the courtyard, coat torn, eyes hollow, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what liberty costs. Around him the people gathered, faces pale and tear-streaked, their hearts unsure whether to mourn or to breathe. He walked to the gates, the same gates that had once closed to starve them out, and pressed the heavy keys into the rough hands of a servant who had spent half his life chained to obedience. "This land is no longer the king's," Brewer said. His voice was low but firm, a prayer disguised as declaration. "It belongs to those who bled upon it." No cheer followed. Only the wind moved, brushing against the scorched flag that had once carried the crown's crest. It fell into the mud like a curse undone. Whitmore knelt where the lash had fallen, the whip still coiled at his feet. His fine clothes hung like rags, and his proud voice had shrunk to a whisper. "Brewer," he gasped. "The arrogance gone, replaced by something brittle and hollow. Spare me. I'll answer to the courts in London. Brewer looked at him the way a man looks at a tomb that once held his fear. "The courts?" His tone was almost gentle. "You built your law with cruelty. You crowned your justice with degradation. Tell me, Lord Whitmore, when the children cried beneath your roof, where was your mercy then?" Whitmore's lips quivered, but no words came. He looked at the faces surrounding him. Faces he had dismissed as less than human. Now they stared back with the unflinching calm of those who had endured too much to ever kneel again. Brewer drew his pistol slowly, the movement solemn, deliberate. He did not raise it with triumph. He raised it with the weight of every lash, every broken hand, every grave that had been dug for dignity's sake. "Mercy," he said quietly, "is for men who had it in their hearts." The shot rang through the morning air, sharp, final, echoing off the manor's walls, like a judgment written by the earth itself. Whitmore fell without a word. The sound lingered longer than the smoke. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if to honor the silence that justice demands. Elias stood beside Brewer, eyes red, jaw set. "It's done," he murmured. But Brewer shook his head. "No, it's begun." His gaze turned toward the horizon, where the sun broke through the fog and spilled its light across the fields. It touched the barns, the fences, the graves. For the first time the light felt honest, stripped of empire, born of struggle. Children watched from the wagons beyond the gate, their small faces illuminated by the dawn. Martha knelt beside them, her arms wrapped tight around Mary. "Remember this day," she whispered, "not for vengeance, but for the courage it took to reclaim what's ours." The people began to move, slow, careful, carrying the wounded, comforting the frightened. The manor would stand, but its meaning was gone. In its shadow, the first flicker of a nation's soul had awakened. The rebellion was no longer rumor. It had found its fire here, in blood and conscience, in the choice to rise rather than kneel. Elias watched the light spread over the valley. "They'll come for us," he said quietly. "With soldiers, with ships, with gold." Brewer nodded, his face unreadable. "Then let them come. We've already chosen who we are." The bells of morning rang from the church in the distance, but they sounded different now, not as instruments of command, but as echoes of transformation. Each note carried the truth they had forged, that liberty is not granted by kings. It is claimed by the broken, rebuilt by the brave, and sealed by the willing sacrifice of ordinary souls. As the smoke lifted and the sun rose higher, Brewer turned once more toward the horizon, where the colonies stretched wide and uncertain. "This," he said softly, "is only the first light." The fields of Virginia lay silent beneath the new sun, as if the land itself were catching its breath after centuries of silence. Smoke still rose from the manor, drifting over the hills like the ghosts of those who had suffered and endured. The wind carried the faint smell of ash and gunpowder, a scent that spoke of endings and of beginnings too. What had started as rebellion now felt like revelation. Ordinary souls, broken and discarded by empire, had lifted their heads and rewritten the language of power. Brewer stood upon the ridge, watching the light creep across the valley. He could still hear the echoes, the cries, the oaths, the sound of the whip striking back against tyranny. In that moment he knew the price of dignity. It was not measured in blood alone, but in the courage to face one's own fear and rise again. The revolution would not be born from kings or signatures. It would be forged in the hands of men and women who had learned to say no, not in anger, but in unyielding truth. Elias approached, his coat torn, his face marked by exhaustion and quiet pride. "They'll write about this," he said softly. Brewer shook his head. "No," he replied. "They'll live because of this." He looked toward the people gathering below. The widows, the farmers, the orphans wrapped in borrowed coats. They were not an army, yet something stronger bound them. A faith that liberty, once awakened, could never again be chained. The old flag of the crown lay trampled in the mud, its colors faded, its symbols stripped of meaning. In its place rose nothing grand, only a simple banner sewn from cloth and resolve. It had no crest, no crown, only the stains of those who had carried it through fire. And yet, beneath that rough and tattered standard, hope took root. From that day, the manor was no longer a place of obedience, but of memory. The ground where humiliation had reigned became sacred with sacrifice. Mothers brought their children there to show them where defiance was born. Old men knelt in silence, remembering brothers who never saw the dawn. Freedom had come not with fanfare but with tears, not through conquest but through conscience. As the sun reached its height, Brewer placed his hand over his heart and whispered, "May this fire never die." And though his words were quiet, the wind carried them far beyond the hills, across rivers and colonies, into hearts that had forgotten how to dream. The struggle was not over, it had only changed shape. The empire would strike back, the storms of war would come, but something eternal had begun to burn within the people. The light of independence, fragile, sacred, unstoppable. If you have walked this journey with them, if their courage has stirred something in you, then stand with them. Even now, carry their flame. Remember that liberty is not given, it is chosen, guarded, lived. Write in the comments, "The flame of freedom burns in me." And if your heart still hungers for stories of sacrifice, justice, and the quiet power of the human spirit, stay with me. Here is another tale of courage born from the ashes of oppression. Click and continue this journey of the Patriots.